Now to Ethiopia, which should have a new prime minister in a matter of days. That's after the ruling coalition chose Dr. Abiy Ahmed to take up the position. He's set to replace Hailemariam Desalegn, who resigned last month. CGTN's Jarvis finds out more about the man set to become Ethiopia's new prime minister.
Dr. Abiy Ahmed is 42 years old and belongs to the Oromo ethnic group, which makes up the majority of Ethiopia's population. He's the current leader of the Oromo People's Democratic Organization that forms part of the ruling coalition, the Ethiopia People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. He was made leader specifically so he could be eligible for the position of Prime Minister. Abiy has served in the Ethiopian army and rose to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. He's a former peacekeeper in the mission to Rwanda and the former Ethiopian Minister of State and Minister of Science and Technology. Known as an astute politician, he also has impressive academic credentials. Abiy was also the founder of the Ethiopian Information Network Security Agency. The Oromia region where he comes from has been the epicenter of recent anti-government protests. He enjoys strong support in the region though, so it's hoped that Abiy is able to address the dissent. Jarvis, CGTN.
Let's get more insights from Dr. Birhanu Lengiso. He is a co-founder and research fellow at the East African Policy Research Institute. He joins us here in studio. Thank you for your time tonight. So what's your take on the election of Dr. Abiy Ahmed as the Prime Minister?
Thank you for having me opinion again. I consider the election of Dr. Abiy Ahmed as a chairperson of the coalition as a good step toward this reform and transition in Ethiopia in general. And I also consider that as a concession to the Protestant movement in the country for the last 3-4 years. I also observed that many Ethiopians are optimistic about this election, that he could be the leader of the reform and the transition and the reconciliation in the country, and not as the leader of EPDRF, because that is the source of all the crises in the country. So many Ethiopians reacted positively. I do react to this, and I welcome his election as the Prime Minister of the country. And at least for 2 reasons, I think Dr. Abiy is the fittest candidate, at least the fittest candidate from within EPDRF. The first reason is because he has experience in military intelligence, and his academic preparation is also relatively good, like he can fit to lead this change in the country. Second, many people consider Dr. Abiy himself as the product of the protest itself. He is a member of the new leadership from Oromia region, or the OPD new leadership. They call themselves as reform leadership. So he already has experience from the regional government. They started to implement some reform at regional level. So there is a chance that he will use that experience to implement reform at the country level. So that is already a good thing.
And speaking
but
of
that
reforms,
is not enough. Huh?
Speaking of reforms, we do know that Ethiopia is one of the world's fastest growing economies. But as we say that, there's also a very huge gap between the rich and the poor. Do you think he's got the muscle to enlist the necessary reforms to bridge this gap? Well,
I think that is already noted. The authoritarian economic model that Ethiopia has been using over the last 27 years has now proved itself to be unjust and unstable. And it put the country already in crisis. As you said, it led to concentration of resource in the hands of very few, and led to impoverishment of the mass. I don't know if there are close to 20 million people now in need of food assistance in the country right now. So considering all this, I think economic reform is one of the priority areas for him to act on. They already started this at regional level. They started to consider issues of land grab and the contraband, illegal trades at regional level. I hope he will continue to consider these issues at country level, and economic reform will be one of the major agendas that he will take.
Well, you mentioned that a lot of Ethiopians are optimistic about his election as the new Prime Minister. So with those expectations, of course, then there is also on his entry a list of things he should do. What do you think should be his priority?
I think that there are a lot of things that he should do. I mean, the country is really in crisis. after the resignation of the previous Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, the country is under state of emergency. Many Ethiopians were shot, killed by security people. You know, close to 1 million Oromos are evicted from their homes, and the crisis is continuing in the country. So there are a lot of things that he should immediately act on. For example, he has to repeal the state of emergency. That is the #1 thing that he should do, because this state of emergency is now the source of many problems in the country. He has to immediately organize and facilitate this inclusive dialogue that many people have been commending for the last 2 years. The opposition figures, journalists, and the government officials are rearrested, so he has to release all those people. There is a long list of things that he should do, and he have to prepare for all this, like for example, pulling back the military deployed in different parts of the country, and serving the justice to the people. You know, there are people who have involved in these atrocities over the last 3-4 years, and there is nothing done about them. There is no even like UN requested to investigate, and they didn't allow UN to do that. So this thing should be, you know, handled in a very nice manner for the country to come to normalcy. It is very, very difficult. I mean, they have to do a lot of things to bring this country to stability.
And there's a lot of things for him to do, and him being from a region that is known for protests over the recent past, what do you see? What do you think is the outlook for Ethiopia, given this new leadership we've seen?
Well, as I said, this is a good step already. His election as the chairperson of the coalition, and probably, I mean, from their experience, we know he will be the prime minister of the country. That is already the good gesture, because he is from that region, and he was also the face of the protest over the last 2 years. But this is far from enough. What he's going to do over the next weeks, over the next months, really matter much. So he has to prioritize. He has to act immediately on those issues. The first thing I think for him is to understand the level of the crisis in the country. The crisis in Ethiopia has been ignored, overlooked, both by the coalition in the country and by the international community. I think the heat of this crisis is already felt at East African region. Like, I mean, neighboring countries are feeling this heat. International communities who have interest on the region are also feeling the heat. So the first step for me is to recognize the extent of this crisis and to bring all stakeholders to act on it. You know, bringing the country back to stability is not really a simple thing that coalition who created it can solve. It is not something that can be solved by one individual, by the Prime Minister. Even the international community should pay attention to this crisis, and it is a huge, huge thing. I hope Dr. Abiy will take the opportunity he has to act and to solve the crisis in the country, to transform Ethiopia into a democratic country that all Ethiopians consider as their home.
All right, we shall leave it there for now. Thank you very much for those insights. Dr. Birhanu Lengiso in studio with us.